Hey guys, here is another victory for me on chess.com. I was black, this brother was white, and his rating was 1,159. Mine was 1,141, so he was actually rated higher than me. He was supposedly, he was supposed to be a better player than me, but obviously we seen who was the better player. I threatened his pawn on e4. And he moves his pawn down further and threatened my knight. And I move my knight up to e4. He moves his bishop to c4. And I stop his pawn from coming down any further. And stop his bishop from moving anywhere. So I move my pawn up to e6. He threatens my knight again, moving his pawn down to d3. And I just move my knight down after he threatens it with his pawn. He brings his knight out to f3, and I move my pawn up again to d5, threatening his bishop. He moves his bishop back. That was his only option. Or he could have moved his bishop down to b5, but he moves it to b3, and I'm moving my pawns up now. As you can see now, I'm taking control of the four center squares in the center part of the board. He had control at first, but after I pushed his pieces back and put that defense on him, he started to move his pieces back. Now I'm taking control. As you see here, I have control of the white square on b4. I'm defending the white square on b4. I'm defending the white square on, is that b4? No, c4. I'm defending the white square on c4. And both of my pawns is defending the white square on e4. And this pawn right here is defending the white square on g4. So I'm defending a lot of squares already. And this is early in the game. I get my second knight involved. He pushes his bishop back. And I take his pawn there on a4. He moves his pawn down to h3. I move my pawn up because I want to get my rook involved eventually. And I started to see that the weak side, his weak side is on the F, G, and H files. With my knight right here, and my queen can come up on this diagonal, and I have to let my rook loose and my bishop. I can kind of see a checkmate over here somewhere. So I kept playing, and he made it even more possible for me to checkmate him because he castled. Now he's trapping his king over in this corner. So what I did was moved my rook over to g8. He threatened my knight, moving his knight further down, and I just want to now push my pawns up the board on that side of the board. He takes my knight, and I take his, so we exchange knights, and then I threaten his knight on f3, and he moves his knight back. I move my pawn up again, threatening his pawn. He takes my pawn, I take his pawn, and his queen can't take that pawn there on g4 because it's protected by my rook here. And he moves his pawn up because he wants to give his king somewhere to run. He see that his king is starting to get trapped into that corner, so he moves his pawn up to f4, allowing his king more spaces to run. So what I do is I move my queen over to h4 because I see that it's really not anything he can do. He can move his knight down to try to threaten he can move his knight down to f3 trying to threaten my queen, but I would just take it with the pawn. He can't move his queen to, well, unless he want to trade queens, he can move his queen over to e1. But there's not really much he can do here. You know, all my pieces are defended, and his king doesn't have really anywhere to go. So he moves his knight down to e4, and just in case I wasn't able to checkmate him, I figure let me take that free piece right here that he just gave me, that knight. You know, he's getting kind of desperate now and trying to do anything to avoid a checkmate because he see that my queen is coming up the H file, and he see my rook is right there on the G file, and my pawn is going to move up in a couple moves. So as you see, he's trying to sacrifice pieces and threaten some of my pieces, thinking that would stop me from checkmating him. But I don't even worry about that knight right there. You know, if he want to take that knight, he can take it, but he don't take that knight with his pawn on d5 because he see that I'm about to checkmate him. So what he does is he moves his rook down. He moves his rook down to f3, and that's when I realized that I could have moved all the way up. Well, no, I couldn't have moved all the way up, I don't think. Nah, hold up, let me see. Let me scroll back a few moves. Okay, so no, I couldn't have done anything right there. Okay, now what I could have done was I could have taken his rook with that pawn there. My pawn on e4, I could have took his rook, but I wanted to end the game, so I put him into check. He moves out the way, and I put him into check again. He moves down. I put him into check again. He takes my pawn, and you know, I move my pawn up and sacrifice my queen because either way I'm gonna take his queen. He realized that. He moves his pawn. What did he take there? Or he took a pawn. And I just put him into check. He moved down to d3. I put him into check again. He moves down to c4. I put him in the check with my bishop. He moves down to b5. I put him into check with my pawn. And that was actually checkmate.